Last night, when I spoke to the talented South Australian Senator Alex Antich, Senator Antich made the point that during the COVID period, as you all know, the health bureaucracies were in the ascendant, to the extent that the trust that many Australians have in their institutions is now at an all-time low through the relentless incursions into our lives and liberty. Senator Antich made the unarguable point that many of these incursions were cruel and unnecessary and failed to address the concerns of Australians who valued what he called the fast evaporating tenet of freedom of choice. Remember, suddenly we had imposed upon us QR codes, social distancing, border restrictions, and basically we weren't even allowed to accept the judgment of our own doctor. Bureaucrats, hardly faceless, so-called chief medical officers with limited qualifications, controlled our lives. Governments sooled them on. All of this cost livelihoods, devastated families, undermined public trust in government, and rightly undermined trust in the medical establishment. The dictates rightly provoked legitimate anger towards government and government bureaucrats and the medical know-alls. Now remember, like most of these experts, whether they be from the Reserve Bank or the energy mafia or the health mafia, they were wrong. Be vaccinated and you'll be safe. Vaccination's the answer. Yet here today, vaccinated people are in hospital, victims again of coronavirus. Well, it was inevitable that some individual would have the courage to take the system on, just as it was inevitable that the system would then buckle. I noted an interesting piece today by a lecturer at the Sydney Law School, Jason Chin, now a disturbing metaphor of the problem. He relates how he was sitting alone in Redfern Park in Sydney, preparing to teach a law lecture. The police told him he had to be actively exercising to be there. He wrote, and I quote, "That experience, however, clarified for me just how grossly imbalanced the system is. I had every resource one could ask for, legal training, advice, time and money, but the process was still dangerous and unnecessary." He writes, "My experience resembled that of many others who were illegally ticketed. I was reading alone in the park, less than a kilometre from home. I looked up to see two police officers hovering over me, accusing me of breaking the law for not actively exercising. They were also intimidating, threatening to arrest me when I asked if I could start exercising now that I knew what the law was," unquote. No luck. Mr. Chin continues, quote, "I used the Revenue New South Wales portal to challenge my ticket. The fine was clearly mistaken, so I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Revenue's response stated that I was in the park with no reasonable excuse, which contradicted the public health order in force defining reasonable excuse as exercise or recreation," unquote. He writes, "It doesn't take a legal background to see that or outdoor recreation has no meaning if it doesn't mean something other than exercise." So he says, "I challenged the ticket in court." 2 months later, Mr. Chin hadn't heard anything from the prosecution. So he called the court and they'd heard nothing. So he called the General Police line and was eventually connected with the officer who had issued the ticket and had harassed him. Mr. Chin explained what he was seeking, and to his surprise, the officer said, "Mate, I gave out a lot of tickets then." Well, Mr. Chin emailed the policeman who issued the public health order on the day he was fined, to which he received a reply that the ticket had been withdrawn. The system had failed at every level, as Mr. Chin says, shockingly imbalanced against accused people without means.